Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time, we are going to be looking at a potential breakthrough for people who are battling severe autoimmune diseases.
It's such a cool area of research. We're talking about achieving lasting remission,
Oh, wow.
freedom from those medications that people have to take, every single day.
Yeah, it's a way of life for so many people, and it's got to be so hard.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be focusing in on a case series that was published actually just last week in the New England Journal of Medicine, February 22nd, 2024, and they follow 15 patients for up to 2 years.
Wow.
It's a pretty good time frame for this type of study.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're looking at CD19 CAR T-cell therapy.
Right.
And this is a type of immunotherapy that is already, making waves in cancer treatment.
Absolutely.
But now it's showing some real promise for tackling these autoimmune diseases like lupus, inflammatory myositis, and systemic sclerosis.
And, it's not just like a mild, sniffle kind of thing.
Right.
We're talking about serious conditions.
Where the immune system just goes totally haywire.
Yeah.
It attacks the body's own tissues, and it leads to chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
And over time, it can cause damage to the organs.
So imagine your immune system is like a security system, right?
Okay.
But it's gone rogue.
Oh, no.
Instead of protecting your house, it starts attacking the walls, the plumbing, the electrical wiring, everything.
Oh, wow.
And to try and control this, patients are having to rely on immunosuppressant drugs long term.
Right. And those drugs, what they do is they dial down the immune response.
Right.
Which can help manage the symptoms.
Right.
But they come with, a whole other slew of risks and side effects.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Not to mention, just the hassle of taking medication every day.
Yeah.
Potentially for the rest of your life.
And the cost too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be really, really burdensome.
So it sounds exhausting, honestly.
Yeah.
So where does this CAR T-cell therapy fit into all of this?
So CAR T offers a totally different approach.
Yeah. It's almost like reprogramming the security system,
Okay.
retraining it to know the difference between good guys and bad guys.
So you're saying we can actually reprogram someone's immune system?
Pretty much.
Oh.
So it starts with these things called T-cells, which are kind of like the special forces of your immune system.
Okay.
And scientists can extract those cells from the patient's blood, and then in a lab, they genetically engineer them to target this specific protein called CD19.
Okay.
And this protein is found on B cells,
Okay.
which are another type of immune cell that plays a key role in a lot of these autoimmune diseases.
So we're giving these special forces T cells a new mission. Seek and destroy anything with this CD19 protein.
Exactly.
Oh.
So then these modified cells, which we call CAR T-cells, are put back into the patient, and they start hunting down and eliminating those B cells that are causing all the problems.
And what makes this so revolutionary is that it's not like those immunosuppressant drugs.
Yeah,
This has the potential to provide a lasting solution,
that's the goal.
not just symptom management.
Exactly. You want to eliminate those kind of rogue B cells.
Right.
And it's like you're resetting the immune system. You're giving it a chance to, reboot.
It almost sounds too good to be true.
I know, it's pretty amazing.
So tell me, what did they actually do in this study?
So they took 15 patients with these severe drug-resistant forms of lupus inflammatory myositis or systemic sclerosis.
So people who really haven't responded to conventional treatments.
Yeah, so these were individuals who had not responded to at least 2 different standard immunosuppressive treatments.
So they were dealing with some seriously stubborn cases.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, these were patients who had pretty much exhausted all their options.
So what happened?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat. Spill the details. What happened after the patients received the CAR T-cell therapy?
Well, to put it mildly, the results were impressive.
Oh, wow. Give me the highlights. What kind of improvements did they see?
Okay, so let's start with those 8 patients that had lupus.
Okay.
So remember how we were talking about that immune system
Yeah.
attacking the body like a rogue security system?
Yeah.
Well, for these patients, it was like the security system finally got the memo to stand down.
So their immune system stopped attacking their own tissues.
Exactly, and not just temporarily either.
Oh, wow.
All 8 of them, they achieved what's called DORIS remission,
Okay.
which is a very strict set of criteria that signifies a deep and sustained response.
Right.
And they remained in remission for the entire follow-up period, which ranged from 4 to 29 months.
Wow. Okay, so what does that mean for these patients? How did their lives change?
I mean, think about it this way. Imagine living with constant fatigue, joint pain,
Yeah.
skin rashes, and like the fear that your organs could be damaged at any moment.
Oh gosh.
And then suddenly all of that starts to fade away.
Wow.
Your energy returns, the pain subsides, your skin clears up, and the threat of organ damage kind of fades away.
That's incredible.
It really is. And remember, these are patients who have been struggling with severe lupus for years, often with little relief from conventional treatments.
So we've got 8 lupus patients experiencing remarkable improvements. What about the others in the study, the 3 that had inflammatory myositis?
They had some pretty amazing results as well.
Oh, really?
So inflammatory myositis attacks the muscles, causing weakness, pain, difficulty moving.
Right.
And all 3 patients experienced a major clinical response after the CAR T-cell therapy.
So they regained muscle strength and they were able to move more easily.
Exactly. Their muscle enzyme levels, which are usually really high in people with inflammatory myositis, went back to normal. And they reported feeling much less fatigued and in less pain.
That's fantastic. And what about the systemic sclerosis patients?
So systemic sclerosis is a really tough disease. It affects multiple organs, including the skin, the lungs, the heart and kidneys, and the 4 patients in the study all showed signs of improvement. Their disease activity decreased, and they actually saw improvements in their skin and lung function.
So even in this complex and often relentless disease, the CAR T-cell therapy showed promise.
It did, but it is important to remember this was a small study.
Right.
And we need more research to confirm these findings, but the early results are really encouraging.
They really are. But before we get too carried away with all these positive results, let's talk about the other side of the coin. The side effects, because, I mean, anytime you're tinkering with the immune system, there's got to be potential for things to go wrong.
Absolutely. Safety is always a top concern, especially with a treatment this powerful.
So what kind of side effects did they see in this study?
Well, the good news is the side effects were generally pretty mild and manageable.
That's reassuring.
Yeah. The most common one was something called cytokine release syndrome, or CRS.
Now, I've heard that term before in the context of CAR T-cell therapy for cancer. It sounds a little scary.
Yeah, it can be, but it's important to understand what it is. It's basically an inflammatory response that happens when the CAR T-cells start doing their job, attacking those target cells.
So it's like the immune system's getting a bit overzealous in its fight.
Exactly, and that can lead to like flu-like symptoms, fever, chills, fatigue, and more severe cases, it can affect the organs.
So how common was this CRS in the study, and how severe were the cases?
Well, 11 out of the 15 patients did experience CRS.
Oh, wow.
But most of them were mild. They mainly had fever, which was easily managed with supportive care.
Oh, good. So nothing too serious.
No, only 1 patient experienced those more severe symptoms. And they responded well to treatment with an antibody that basically calms down that inflammatory response.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Were there any other side effects?
So 1 patient had mild symptoms of something called ICANS. Which is short for immune effector cell-associated neurotoxicity syndrome.
That sounds pretty intense.
It can be, but again, in this case, the symptoms were mild and they resolved quickly with treatment.
Okay, so aside from CRS and this ICANS thing, were there any other red flags?
So the study didn't find any evidence of long-term bone marrow suppression, which is another potential concern with CAR T-cell therapy.
So the treatment didn't seem to have any lasting negative effects on their ability to produce new blood cells.
Right. And that's really important because it means that those patients are less likely to experience complications like infections later on.
Okay, so overall, the side effect profile seems pretty reassuring, especially when you consider, the potential benefits.
Yeah, I think the risks are definitely outweighed by the rewards here.
Now, there's one more thing I wanted to ask about.
Sure.
The study mentioned that the CAR T-cell therapy causes something called B-cell aplasia.
Right.
Can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Sure. So remember how we talked about CAR T-cells targeting and destroying B-cells that display the CD19 protein?
Right.
Well, B-cell aplasia is basically a period of time where there are no B-cells in the bloodstream.
So the CAR T-cells effectively just wipe out those B-cells?
Temporarily, yes. In this study, the average duration of B-cell aplasia was about 112 days.
So for about 3 to 4 months, these patients basically had no functioning B cells.
Right.
But isn't that a problem? Don't we need B cells to fight off infections?
We do, because B cells make antibodies,
Yeah.
which are those like guided missiles that target and neutralize pathogens.
So wouldn't wiping out those B cells leave these patients vulnerable to infections?
Well, you would think so.
Yeah.
And as you might expect, the study did find that immunoglobulin levels, those are the antibodies that help fight off infection.
Right.
They did dip as expected, but here's the interesting part.
Okay, what is it?
Even though those levels dropped, most of their vaccine protection that they built up over their lives remained intact.
Really?
So their bodies still had some defenses.
So it's like the immune system takes a temporary hit, but it's not completely disarmed.
Exactly. It seems that those long-lived plasma cells, which reside in the bone marrow and act as those antibody factories, weren't significantly affected by the therapy.
Oh, interesting.
So it seems the CAR T-cells were mostly targeting those B cells circulating in the blood, leaving the long-term antibody producers relatively untouched.
So what happens after those 112 days? Do the B cells ever come back?
They do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's another really fascinating aspect of this.
Right.
After that period of B-cell aplasia, those B cells, they start to repopulate.
So it's like the immune system is rebooting itself?
In a way, yeah, but the B cells that come back are different.
Oh, how so?
They mainly have what's called a naive phenotype.
Okay.
Which means they haven't encountered any specific antigens yet, and they haven't started producing antibodies.
So it's like the immune system is starting with a clean slate.
That's a good way to put it, and this finding really supports the idea that the therapy might be doing more than just wiping out B cells. It might be resetting the immune system to a more balanced state, preventing it from mounting those harmful autoimmune attacks.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really does seem like this therapy has the potential to revolutionize the way we treat autoimmune diseases.
It does. It really opens up a whole new world of possibilities for people who've been living with these debilitating conditions for years, often with little hope of a cure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've talked about those remarkable results, the potential side effects, and this fascinating phenomenon of the B-cell aplasia and repopulation.
Yes.
But I do want to dive a little deeper into the specifics of each disease.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand how the therapy affected each of those 3 autoimmune diseases that were studied.
Exactly. So let's start with lupus. We know that all 8 patients achieved DORIS remission.
Yes.
But what does that look like, in terms of specific improvements?
Well, remember how we talked about those autoantibodies?
Yes.
Those rogue antibodies that attack the body's own tissues? Yeah. Well, in these patients, the levels of those autoantibodies just plummeted after the CAR T-cell therapy.
Wow.
And they stayed undetectable throughout the follow-up period.
So their immune system wasn't producing those harmful antibodies anymore.
That's right, and they also saw improvements in other key markers of lupus activity.
Like what?
Like complement factor C3 levels, which are often low in people with active lupus, they return to normal.
Wow.
And even proteinuria, which can indicate kidney damage, resolved.
So it wasn't just a temporary fix. The therapy seemed to have a really deep and lasting impact on the underlying disease process.
Exactly. And remember, these were patients with severe drug-resistant lupus who had tried everything else.
Yeah.
So the fact that they achieved such a profound and sustained response is really remarkable.
It really is. Now, what about inflammatory myositis? What kind of improvements did they see in that group?
So all 3 patients with inflammatory myositis, they met the criteria for a major clinical response, which means that they saw significant improvements in muscle strength reductions and enzyme levels and just overall, improvements in their quality of life.
So not only did their lab tests improve, but they actually felt better.
Exactly. They had more energy, less pain, and were able to move more freely.
That's amazing. And finally, systemic sclerosis. What kind of improvements were seen there?
So all 4 patients with systemic sclerosis showed a decrease in disease activity, which was measured by the standard assessment tool called the European Scleroderma Trials and Research Group Activity Index. So this index takes into account a range of symptoms, including skin thickening, joint pain, and lung function.
Did they see any improvements in specific areas like their skin or lung function?
They did. So the 3 patients who had at least 6 months of follow-up showed a really significant reduction in skin thickness.
Wow.
And they also had improvements in their lung function.
So even in this complex disease that affects multiple organs, the CAR T-cell therapy had a noticeable impact.
It did. Now, it's important to emphasize, these were all small groups of patients.
Right.
We need more research to confirm these findings, but the early results are very promising.
They are. They really are. But before we wrap up this discussion, there's one more important question we need to address: the long-term safety of this therapy.
Right.
We talked about the short-term side effects.
Yes.
But what about the potential for, long-term complications? What did the researchers see during the follow-up period?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, one of the main long-term concerns with her CAR T-cell therapy is the risk of infections.
Right.
Especially since the treatment, temporarily wipes out those B cells.
Right, because those B cells are so important for fighting off, all those nasty pathogens.
They are. So did they see any infections in these patients during the follow-up period?
Yeah, what happened there?
Well, there were some infections reported both in the short term and the longer term.
Okay, that's not surprising, given that the treatment suppresses the immune system. But what kind of infections were they and how serious were they?
So most of the infections were pretty mild things like upper respiratory tract infections, like colds or the flu.
Right.
One patient did develop pneumonia about 7 weeks after the CAR T-cell infusion.
Okay.
Which did require hospitalization.
Oh, no.
But it resolved with antibiotic treatment.
Oh, okay, good. So while infections did occur, they were generally manageable.
Right.
And they didn't seem to pose any major threat to their health.
Exactly. And it's important to note that the rate of infections in this study was actually lower than what's typically seen.
Really?
In patients with severe autoimmune diseases who are on those long-term immunosuppressive medications.
That's interesting.
It suggests that even though the CAR T-cell therapy temporarily depletes B cells, it might actually reduce the overall risk of infections in the long run.
Wow. Compared to the standard of care.
Exactly.
That's a pretty remarkable finding.
It is.
So not only could this therapy be more effective at controlling the disease, but it might also make patients less susceptible to infections in the long term.
That's what we're hoping for.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I imagine even with all these positive findings, there's still a lot of caution, surrounding this therapy.
Oh, for sure. This is still a very new treatment.
Yeah.
We need to proceed with caution.
Right.
And long-term monitoring is going to be crucial to understand the full safety profile.
Right.
We need to know how these patients fare over years, not just months.
That makes sense. So what are the next steps? What kind of research is needed to move this therapy forward?
So first and foremost, we need larger controlled trials to confirm these initial findings.
Right.
And to really evaluate the safety and efficacy of CD19 CAR T-cell therapy for autoimmune diseases.
Right, because this study only involved 15 patients.
Exactly. We need to see if these results hold up in larger groups of patients.
Yeah.
We also need to explore different dosing regimens and treatment protocols to determine the optimal approach.
And I imagine that researchers are also looking at ways to minimize the risk of those side effects.
Absolutely.
Especially, those related to the depletion of the B cells.
For sure. There's a lot of research focused on strategies to, mitigate that risk of infections and other complications.
So there's still a lot of work to be done, but it sounds like we're on the cusp of something truly groundbreaking.
The potential for CAR T-cell therapy to transform the lives of people with autoimmune diseases is just immense.
It's an exciting time to be following this field.
It is.
But before we get too carried away with all the possibilities, let's bring it back to the here and now. We've been talking about some pretty complex stuff.
We have.
So let's recap. What are the most important things for our listeners to remember about CD19 CAR T-cell therapy for autoimmune diseases?
I think the main takeaway is that this is a potentially game-changing therapy for people with those severe treatment-resistant autoimmune diseases.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
What else?
The early results are so promising. We're seeing deep and sustained remissions in patients who have previously exhausted all other options.
Right, and importantly, the side effects seem to be manageable.
Yes, most patients are experiencing mild side effects, and there haven't been any long-term safety concerns identified so far.
Okay, that's good. Anything else?
And I think it's important to emphasize that this is still very new.
Right.
And more research is needed to confirm these findings and to really explore its full potential.
So there's still a lot to learn. But the future looks bright for CAR T-cell therapy in the fight against autoimmune diseases.
It does.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Oh, I like this. Lay it on me.
What if this therapy is just the tip of the iceberg?
Okay.
What if we are actually on the verge of like a paradigm shift in medicine?
Wow.
Where we can reprogram the immune system, not just to manage, but to potentially cure a wide range of diseases. What do you think?
Yeah, it is pretty thrilling. And to be honest, after seeing this research, I'm starting to think it might not be so far-fetched.
I know, me too. It really feels like we're entering a new era of medicine.
Yeah.
But even with all the excitement, there's still so much that we just don't understand.
Right. Yeah.
Like, how does this actually work?
Yeah.
We've talked about the mechanics of it, the coagulated T cells, targeting and destroying those B cells.
Right.
But what's the deeper explanation? for these long-lasting remissions.
Yeah.
It's like the immune system just forgets its bad habits and learns to tolerate the body's own tissues again.
Yeah, it really does seem like it's resetting the immune system to a more balanced state.
But what's the secret sauce?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And we don't have all the answers yet.
Yeah.
But there are some really intriguing theories emerging.
Okay, lay it on me.
Yeah.
What are some of the leading explanations for how this therapy is working its magic?
Well, one possibility is that those CAR T-cells are doing more than just eliminating the B cells. They might also be interacting with other immune cells, like T cells, and kind of modulating their activity.
So it's not just a direct attack on the B cells, but it's also like re-educating those other players in the immune system.
Exactly. It's like the CAR T-cells are acting as peacekeepers, restoring order to a chaotic immune system.
I like that analogy. It makes sense. But what kind of evidence is there to support this idea?
Well, there have been studies that show that CAR T-cells can influence the balance of different types of T-cells.
Okay.
So they can promote the types of T-cells that suppress immune responses.
Okay.
The ones that kind of help to keep things in check.
Right.
And they can also dampen the activity of those T-cells that drive inflammation.
Okay.
The ones that tend to overreact.
So the CAR T-cells are fine-tuning the immune response, making sure it's not too aggressive or too passive.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so that's one possible explanation. What are some of the other theories that are out there?
Another really interesting one is that the therapy is somehow influencing the gut microbiome.
Wait, the gut, what does that have to do with autoimmunity?
A lot more than we used to think.
Really?
Yeah, so the gut microbiome, those trillions of bacteria that live in our intestines,
Right.
They play a crucial role in shaping our immune system.
I had no idea.
It's true. And in recent years, researchers have discovered that alterations in the gut microbiome can actually contribute to the development of a wide range of autoimmune diseases.
So it's possible that the CAR T-cell therapy is somehow like shifting the balance of bacteria in the gut.
Exactly.
Creating an environment that's less conducive to autoimmunity.
Yeah, it's like the therapy is not just targeting the immune system directly,
right.
but also tweaking the environment in which that immune system operates.
That is so fascinating. So it's like the key to treating these autoimmune diseases might actually lie in our gut.
Isn't that amazing? And it just goes to show how much we still have to learn about this complex interplay, between our immune system, our microbiome, and just our overall health.
It's incredible. So we have all these clues about how this therapy might be working.
We do.
But as you said, more research is needed to unravel all those mysteries.
Absolutely. We need those larger, longer-term studies to really confirm these initial findings, to explore different dosing regimens and treatment protocols, and to identify any potential long-term risks.
And of course, we need to see if this approach can be applied to other autoimmune diseases beyond the 3 that were studied here.
Exactly. Imagine the possibilities if we could use this to treat things like rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh my gosh.
Multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
Type 1 diabetes.
It's mind-boggling and a little overwhelming, if I'm being honest.
I know, it's a lot to take in.
We've covered so much today, from those initial exciting study results to the intricate details of B-cell aplasia and the microbiome.
It's been a whirlwind.
It really has. But hopefully it's left you feeling informed and intrigued about the future of autoimmune disease treatment.
I think so.
And I'm sure our listeners are eager to see what the future holds for these groundbreaking therapies.
I know, I am. It's a really exciting time.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of CD19 CAR T-cell therapy for autoimmune diseases.
Wow.
We explore the science, the potential, and those lingering questions, and we hope that this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this groundbreaking therapy and the hope that it offers to millions of people battling these really challenging conditions.
It's been a pleasure diving in with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.